Thank you guys for being with us for this webinar on Jewish storytelling in the post-October 7th era. All right, I think we'll get started. I'm still seeing folks trickle in. I have two dear friends with us today, two real legends in the business of communications, advertising, and leaders who have navigated telling the Jewish story for many decades. David Suissa, the editor and publisher of the Jewish Journal, in a former life, the head of Suissa Miller Advertising, sometimes described as the mayor of Jewish Los Angeles, and a real amazing friend and collaborator on so many things with me. We're very excited to have David. Gary Wexler, also a veteran of the ad business. David and Gary were just talking. I think they've been friends for 40 plus years. Gary recently authored the most viral column in the history of the Jewish Journal, maybe, on this very subject. He has a lot of thoughts to share. Gary also had an advertising business called Passion Marketing that was very focused on the Jewish community and the nonprofit world for many years. Both David and Gary came into our firm. Every Thursday we have a lunch and learn here, and we had separate conversations with them. And my team was so blown away by the conversations and so moved. And we thought, you know what, we need to get this group together to share some of those insights with the Jewish community and those who are thinking about and communicating with the Jewish community at this time, and really have a conversation. So today, our agenda is we're gonna have some questions that I want to address, and then I really want to turn it over to this group to answer your questions. We've gotten a huge response from all around the world of folks who are interested in the subject of today's webinar. So I'll encourage you all to put your questions into the Q&A. We will try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. And we're very, very excited to hear what David and Gary have to share in this really important moment for the Jewish community. And I'll add a few thoughts as well. So Suissa, I want to start with you. The subject of this webinar, like we said, is what's Jewish storytelling in the post-October 7th era. You know, I often have said that storytelling is something that's innate to all of us. You know, since humans have been painting on cave walls, we've had this need to tell stories to each other. And I think that's particularly true at a moment of trauma, at a moment of pain. So I want to get your sense of, you're speaking with the Jewish community every single day as the editor-in-chief of the Jewish Journal. What do you think is the state of the Jewish community right now? And how has the story that we tell about ourselves changed? And how should people thinking about that Jewish story at this really unique moment?
You know, Nate, when you brought up this idea, I wasn't sure about it because it felt to me as if storytelling was not critical to the moment because we're going through such an intense emotional time. And then as the weeks went on, I realized it was the exact opposite. And I'll tell you why. What I'm sensing right now is an enormous amount of opinions and emotions. And it's nobody's fault. It's just the way we react as humans. And this is even before October 7th. So as much as storytelling is a crucial part of what it means to be human, in the world we live in today, it's not an obvious choice because we seem to be ignited by our emotions and our opinions. And one of the things I hope we'll cover today is how we could kind of counteract our instinct. If you look at social media, if you look at just the way we act in life, we tend to share a lot of opinions. Opinions is what we love, what we hate. We share our emotions. We're horrified by what we've seen. So this idea of storytelling is not obvious. And it's something we have to go out of our way to do. And I'll give you many examples as we go this morning. And we're not going to be able to cover everything in this short time frame. But I'm hoping we can plant the seed today for us going out of our way, no matter what it is we do, whether we run a synagogue, an organization, whether we have a Shabbat table, is to kind of go out of our way. The piece that Nate mentioned about Gary Wexler. It was the most read story we've had all year by far. And I think one of the reasons it worked so well is because it was a story. And we're going to be speaking more about this with a lot more examples today.
That's great. Thank you. I want to take it now to Gary. So, piggybacking on David's thoughts, Gary, what do you think what is the quintessential story that we now need to communicate to the Jewish community? And what's the story that the Jewish community needs to communicate to the world, if you had to boil it down?
So Nate, first of all, you failed to tell this audience something, that the three of us are very good friends. We together talk about this subject constantly. And I want to thank you for doing this. And David, thank you for the opportunity for writing for the Jewish Journal. I would love to say to you, it's changed my life. I'm not sure it's for the better right now.
How many emails did you get from that article?
500 emails.
Wow.
And I answered every single one. I'm absolutely insane. But we'll talk about what went on those emails and what it came to. But I want to get back to what Nathan has asked. So first of all, I want to talk about the story we need to tell ourselves in the Jewish community. That story is we have had a massive failure in communication, and we are to blame for it. Our enemies have had an exceeding communication victory. They are way beyond us. We are on the playing field that they have created, and we're in a defensive position constantly. And we have to look at ourselves in this community and say, why did we fail? What is it that we didn't do? And I want to be able, having asked that question, to raise the discussion here to say, yes, this is about storytelling, but it is about something even more. Our enemies out there on the playing field have a story that they have told, but it is the way that they used ideas of engagement out there in a strategic way with big, huge ideas to engage people so that they could then hear their story. We have to be able to look at this. If we're going to win this battle, we have to win this battle, and we can, because Jews are really clever and creative. The opposition has been so clever and creative in what they have done that I at times want to sit at their feet and say, teach me what you folks know how to do here. We have to be able to outsmart them with our creativity, with our cleverness, with our strategy, and our understanding of what the big ideas need to be.
I think that's such a good, important point. We talk about it a lot. The ecosystem of influence in this moment that the communications environment has changed so rapidly. You look at the way that the other side has built platforms of influence, whether that's lobbyists in Washington, whether that's their own media outlets, places like Al Jazeera, infiltration into other mainstream media, digital engagement, including through trolls and bots and other things that violate the terms of services of those of social influencers, universities, K through 12 education. It's a remarkable investment over decades in these channels of influence that are now coming together in a very coordinated way. And we're seeing it all deployed at once. I think I agree with you, Gary. We need to create our own ecosystem of influence. I think we talk about what that looks like. But I want to come back to the question I asked, which I think it's really important. It begins with the Jewish community, right? I think we're at a historic moment, a pivotal moment when you look at Jewish history. These are the most important months that I've been alive as a Jew, and I think for you guys as well, actually, in many ways. We have people who have not been engaged in Jewish life, or who have not believed that this was their problem or this issue, who are now coming into the ecosystem. First of all, we need to bring them into a room that's inviting, that's inspiring, and we need to, translate that into action for them. We need to give them the playbook for what it is. And I think it's at this moment, Jewish institutions have a responsibility to figure out, what do we do with this surge of interest and resources and engagement? Both of you have been in those rooms, at those tables, at moments that are not quite as, I'd say, pivotal, but the closest we've been to over this last generation. So I want to get Suissa, Wexler. What is the opportunity right now for Jewish organizations for this group of people, maybe who have been disengaged, maybe who thought this wasn't their problem, who are now coming to them and saying, what can we do? How would you think about being a leader of an organization at this moment? And what's the responsibility and the opportunity for them?
Well, you know, I think maybe one of the nuances between Gary and I is Gary, God bless him, he thinks very much in terms of victory, and I love that he does. I think more in terms of connection. When I've asked my kids, what's the most important thing I've ever told them in terms of Jewish connection? And they always bring back this idea of this 2,000-year story that my kids are part of, right? And in that story, you know, you don't need to make a leap of faith. You don't have to believe that God split the Red Sea. You don't have to believe in the miracles of the Bible. Just the mere fact, and I tell them every Friday night, you know, 1,000 years ago in some little village in Morocco, or Bubbies and Zaydis were reciting the same Kiddush. There is a miracle to the Jewish story. And I think since October 7th, one of the things I've tried to do with my kids is put it in the context of this epic Jewish story. And the truth is that in this epic Jewish story, which one can argue is the greatest story in human history, you know, we've had a lot of ups and downs. And, you know, October 7th is one of the deepest, most horrendous downs that we've had. But if you look at it in terms of the whole Jewish story, and that includes amazing ability to recover and resiliency. So I look at storytelling as an opportunity to reinforce the connection that Jews have to their tradition and to their people, that this is an amazing story. So the October 7th is not a temporary moment where we just connect for just a few months until we win the war and move on to the next story. That you are now, this is part of this epic story. And the fact that it's so intense, I think, gives us an opportunity to create a deeper connection.
That's beautiful. Gary, building on that, you've sat in many rooms with nonprofit leaders, with your business for many years. You know, you're sitting with someone who's the head of a federation or a Hillel or a smaller organization. What are you telling them at this moment of, I believe, of great responsibility? I've had many of those conversations myself where I've said to the leaders, you are Moses leading your people across the desert at this moment. This is a moment of great weight for you. What are your practical pieces of advice that you would we want to get the unvarnished Gary Wexler here. What would you tell them at this moment, you know, to help them think about the responsibility and how they move forward?
So I want two things. First of all, I want to go back to what David just said about the story of the Jewish people, because it's such an important thing to say here. First of all, the first thing I would say to people is collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. This is our problem together and ours to solve together. What David is just demonstrating, and you, Nathan, is a collaboration between the three of us with different ideas, different opinions, different ways of going out about this in a creative process. This collaboration is so essential that we're able to hear one another, take in each other's opinions, fuse them, and start to do some output. The Jewish community does not do this. I have had so many organizations since my article appeared in the Jewish Journal who I have spoken to who have said to me, and when I say to them, we need to collaborate, this is all our problem together, they say to me, oh, I can't collaborate with this organization. Oh, I won't work with those people. Those people are politically in a different place from me. No, those people fund this, they do that. The communication failure and our success is our problem together. And we're going to have to figure out how to collaborate. Right now, what's happening is it's, again, everyone's making Shabbat for themselves. There's all these foundations, all these organizations, all these federations, all this, each one going off on their own, thinking they can solve this by themselves. They can't. So collaboration is the number one thing. The number two thing that I would say to them is October 7th changed everything. It means we have to break all the boxes of the way that we have been working in the Jewish world, particularly in communication. The formulas of saying, oh, it's about branding, it's about social media, it's about storytelling, it's about this and it's about that. Yes, of course, but it's got to be about so much more right now. And we've got to be able, as I said, the engine is the ideas that we as Jewish people need to create in this space. We have got to break our comfort zones, walk out and create a new methodology in a new way, and collaborate with one another.
Picking up on that, I want to ask David a question. The ideas that change the world. Suissa, I think the Jewish Journal's done an amazing job since October 7th of covering this with a lot of heart and a lot of insight. What are some of the ideas, the most important ideas that you think you've presented in the journal at this moment that have really spoken to you and spoken to audiences wider that you think would be helpful for this group to hear, or just that you would highlight for them?
I think honesty. There was a piece that I wrote where I ran out of words, and I realized I was in Israel for a month and I just ran out of words. And it's a rare moment for me because I usually just don't stop having these amazing conversations when I'm in Israel. And I was so overwhelmed by October 7th and the repercussions that I just couldn't talk. And I wrote about that in the Jewish Journal. And we've tried to be kind of as honest as possible. But one thought that just entered my mind as I was hearing Gary speak is that the very idea of storytelling has driven the story of the Jewish people since October 7th, whether we like it or not. What has moved us so much is those stories that came out of the horror of October 7th. It's like we can't unring the bell. And those stories kind of traumatize us. I won't even repeat them. So in a way, it's like storytelling has driven this whole story, whether we like it or not. So I'm in Israel and I'm seeing an epidemic of volunteering. There are Jews from all over the world that are coming and helping to pick tomatoes and going to army bases. And every Israeli right now is part of a story of helping a neighbor or a friend. So what's remarkable about this webinar, Nate, is that the storytelling has inundated us, has driven this whole thing, because everywhere we turn, we just hear another story. I can't tell you how often we've been getting submissions of groups all over Los Angeles, you know, of Jews, and you've gone through the same thing. Stories of people, what can we do to help Israel? So you got the darkness and the light that are working, that are happening together. The darkness of the horrible stories that we cannot forget, and then the light of the incredible volunteering that's happening at the same time. So our job is, how do we gather this storytelling energy that's already entered our community?
I think it's such an important, powerful thing to note. You know, I'm going to make a public service announcement. I want to share a response to that, and then we'll go. The public service announcement is, if you put your questions in the chat now, we are going to try to get to them. We're going to do about 5 more minutes of conversation here, and then we have 120 attendees here on this webinar, and we're going to have a lot more who are going to be watching it afterwards. So share your questions now, and we're going to try to go to all of them. But
Nate, you forgot to add questions, not speeches.
The good thing is we get the questions in writing, so there's no so we've eliminated that problem.
Welcome to Jewish people.
That's why I like them in writing. I always tell my clients, you know, if you can do the questions on the cards as opposed to they always don't like that, but I think it's a good piece of advice for that very reason. I want to say something, which is, in the weeks after October 7th, you know, we've been inundated in this work. My core business is not with the Jewish community. It's crisis communications, working with tech companies, working in other areas. And I feel like so many others after October 7th, there's nothing else I could do but this. And we've done a lot of work, you know, with the hostage families, you know, helping people who are facing anti-Semitism in their workplace or in their school. And it was like, you know, just like so many of you, I've been immersed in it. And it felt totally impossible. Like no matter what we did, it was just a drop in the bucket. It wasn't going to do anything. I never felt that way before. I always feel, one of the great things about being in the communications business, you always feel like you can make a difference, like you can really move the needle, and you have this huge platform. And in the weeks after October 7th, I really felt powerless. And I also felt very concerned about the direction of this country. I will say, in the last couple weeks, I've begun to feel more hopeful. And for a couple reasons. One, because like what you just said, David, that the surge in interest and focus within and outside the Jewish community. And we brought a group of hostages here to LA, and your daughter, David, Shani, sat around the fire with us with a group families of hostage people who were still captive in Gaza. We had this wonderful group. It was a mixed group of Jews and non-Jews. And then I had some friends of mine who are non-Jewish who said, we are so moved by this, we want to host them for a big event with all these guys in Hollywood. We're not going to have a single Jewish person there. We want it to be everybody outside because we want to show. It was really inspiring. And I've seen just the surge of engagement and focus from people who were not in this fight before is incredible. And I think, to Gary's point, we've been fighting the last war. They were preparing for this war. But I believe in 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to be fighting the next war. And I think we're going to be successful. And I think the environment in the Middle East is going to change. I think what you've seen, the thing that people aren't talking about, is that Saudi Arabia still wants to make peace with Israel, that the Arab world more broadly understands that there's an opportunity. And I think it's going to be an ugly, terrible battle. But at the end of the day, I do believe that there's going to be a brighter future for that region. And I think those combinations of things, and there's some other things too, I'm feeling a little bit more hopeful. I want to ask you guys, do you feel hopeful about?
Can I comment on what you just said?
Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, before I say anything, folks, look to the left of David Suissa's head and you see a photo of his parents there. Okay, you want to hear
grandparents.
His mother, who is 90 years old, comes from Montreal to Los Angeles and makes the most incredible Moroccan Shabbat dinners you've ever want to have. So you want to become David's close friend so that you get invited to one of those Moroccan Shabbat dinners that Memi Suissa makes. Her name's really Suzanne, but they all call her in French Memi, so do I. Anyway, Nathan, I want to add a piece to what you just said about what's going to happen in the next several years. I think there's some other realities we have to look at. I was just in Israel too. I was in a meeting with 20 people through this organization. There were high-tech people in there. There were military people in there. There were finance. There were some Mossad people in there. What just happened in Israel is not just about Israel. Israel is the canary in the coal mine of a much deeper situation, as I am learning. We are facing a multi-billion dollar business that the enemies of the Jewish people and of the West are creating through what they're doing. This money is flowing through Africa, majorly Liberia, as they have found out, and we are going to be, and the West, in a much deeper battle about the values of the West versus the value of these terrorists. And this is going to get much more complicated and much thicker to deal with as time goes on. And we're going to have to be prepared for this battle, and we're going to need allies outside of the Jewish world in this battle, because this is shaping up to be a very, very serious battle that we have to wake up to.
That's amazing. That's important. All right. We have 16 questions already, just 20 minutes in. I want to start getting to some of these questions. There's some great questions here. I want to start with a question from James Cummings, which is, I'm going to direct this to Gary because this has been an issue you spent a lot of time on. I remember when Gary, he asked, how do we best bridge the generational gaps between the current living elders and the subsequent adult and juvenile generations after us? Gary has been an expert on this. I remember when he was talking about millennial boomer communications when millennials were still young. So you answered this question in my office, and I don't know if you remember what you said, but I think you have a really beautiful response to how do we bridge these gaps between different generations and how they see this issue.
I don't remember a word of what I said. That tells you how. So, and I just want to say something. Nathan is referring to a book I wrote many years ago called Sorry Millennials, We're Not Dead Yet. Anyway, look, I want to talk about, in this case, Jewish different generations. We have to realize what commonality we have between us as the generations and as Jews. Aside from looking at saying, what are the vast differences? I want to go back to David's story that he was telling about the Jewish people. One of the most extraordinary stories that I think about is how we literally pass on our culture from generation to generation. And I look at my kids and I look at my grandkids and I think to myself, this is just absolutely miraculous that we as a people have done this and we've continued to survive. I think we need to look and see what we have in common, and then we need to listen to one another. Having been a professor at USC, I used to say to my students, I don't live in the digital world that you folks live in. You've got to be able to keep teaching me. What I can teach you about is how to be able to use this to actually accomplish the bottom line goals. So we need to be learning from each other all the time. And unfortunately, in the Jewish world, what's happened in the organized Jewish world is the answer is always the new generation. It's like, they're the people we're after, they're the people we're worried about, and we forget about older generations and the value that they bring to the table here. Go ahead.
I couldn't agree more. And when I talk about the changes in the communications environment, we think about this a lot. You have to be analog and digital. I wrote a piece for Forbes a month ago about, that AI is actually it's gonna make those core communications principles more relevant. You're gonna have to write better, think more strategically, and think about how you use these tools as an extension of that work. But AI is not going to replace strategic critical thinking, and that's where I think the older generation has a lot to add. Okay, Suissa, I want to come to you. This is from our buddy Rick Enton. The narrative is already starting to turn towards the crises with the innocent Palestinians in Gaza and the humanitarian impacts of the war. For those of us who support Israel and understand the need for the war effort to dismantle Hamas, how can we craft a story to respond? Well, how do you respond to that narrative, Suissa?
Well, I think there's a trap we need to avoid if we can. And when we talk about the victory of the other side in terms of the narrative that they've created, it's a narrative that's based around victimhood. And as much as we have been victims of misinformation and victims of terrorism, I think we need to avoid the trap of identifying the Jews as victims. Because it's not what has made us successful for thousands of years. It's not what makes our kids successful. It's not what makes the Jews successful in America. It's not this idea of abandoning responsibility and just blaming everybody else. So there's a real trap, especially when the narrative of victimhood is actually true. So we are victims of misinformation. We are victims of Hamas and the propaganda. We really, really are victims. And I think that's precisely why we need to make sure that that is not the only way we define ourselves, especially with the new generation and with our kids. At the end of the day, Nate, Gary, Rick, my good friend Rick, the Jews have been winners in America. We've been defined by an idea of winning. We've contributed so much to America. We've made America laugh. We've defended America with social justice on so many levels. We're truly a successful group in America. And it's important that as we go through with our storytelling, that we don't just settle for the storytelling of Hamas is lying about us and we need to correct the lies. That doesn't last. I wrote a piece on fighting anti-Semitism as winners, not whiners. And I think this is the big picture that we should always keep in mind, because the victimhood is like sugar. It's very seductive, and especially when it's true. We really are victims right now, victims of a horrible campaign. We had a cover story on what's happening at International Criminal Court. And we are victims of hypocrisy. We are victims at the United Nations. But I say we cannot forget the underlying story, that we are not just a successful group in America, but we are a beloved group in America. And there are pockets of Jewish hatred. There are pockets of anti-Semitism, and it's gone alarmingly high. But the recent polls have shown that the stories we don't hear are the stories that America still loves the Jews. A lot of America does.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's so important. I often say that the framework of how we've taught Israel institutionally is wrong. It's the inverse of the JFK maxim. It's not what you can do for Israel, it's what Israel can do for you. We've been failing to explain to our next generation. But Israel and Judaism, the reason you want to have a relationship with Israel is the same reason you want to have a relationship with your family. That the depth, and I think that there's going to be a surge, like I said, of interest in this in a big way. And the question is, more people are going to come into the room. What leaders are going to be ready at that moment, at this historic moment, to put all the pettiness, all the dysfunction behind and have something that's powerful for them to say, that's big picture, that's visionary, that moves them into the future. Okay, I want to answer Bruce Shanzer's question. Is it your understanding that Arab communication strategy has been centrally coordinated? If yes, has it been coordinated by a country, e.g. Qatar, or by any other agency such as the PA? I'm going to answer it, and Gary, if you wrote an article about this too. I know Qatar has spent $1 trillion over the last 10 years in its public relations influence campaigns around the world. It's unbelievable, mind-boggling the amount of money and the investments that it's made, and that's been widely reported now. And I don't think it's one central body, but I think it's far fewer cooks. The Jewish community has the cost and benefit of having, many different efforts. But it creates a real challenge. And I do think there's been more systemic, strategic, sustained efforts that look at longer time horizons, that think about an ecosystem in a bigger way, that hire more professional operatives as opposed to relying on volunteers. And for all of those reasons, at this moment where technology is very important in thinking about how people actually receive messages, I think they've been able to leapfrog the Jewish community, versus the situation we were in 20 years ago. Do you want to add anything to that, Gary? Or
Yes, I think they started out very centralized, very coordinated, very directed. I mean, I heard it myself in the first article that I wrote from a very sinister Arab guy that I spoke with. And everything he laid out to me eventually became reality, which said to me, these people had a plan. They wouldn't have the success that they have been having without some coordination. They understand the importance of community organizing. And if you ask me, their biggest success, which took a lot of coordination and understanding, was how they have turned so many Jewish kids who have day school backgrounds, who have Camp Vermont backgrounds, who have birthright backgrounds, to be the people out there demonstrating against Israel at this point. This has been a huge success of theirs. This couldn't have happened just with some offshoot. This was majorly thought about, majorly coordinated to happen. And this is why, if we in the Jewish community don't figure out how to coordinate and collaborate with one another, we will never be able to stand up against their success.
Right. Okay. I want to go to Ariel Henny, and I'm going to give this to Suissa. Jewish traditions about have root to challenging each other, appreciating the richness of different interpretations, the importance of helping each other. Yes. How do we lose that appreciation, the value of the Hillel Shammai dialogue? How can we recover that ability to collaborate? I think Suissa is a great example of that, sort of appreciating the beauty of that. Can you give the audience just some examples of folks you think that are able to model that respectful dialogue? How do you think about that running a Jewish publication like the Jewish Journal?
Well, I think we've been demonstrating that this morning, because I've been pushing back. I push back on the idea of victory. I push back on the idea of, victimhood. So there's been some really healthy pushback in this very conversation to look at how we approach this problem. I can even push back on the idea of trying to coordinate everything, because it's really not that realistic. It's just part of the reality of the Jewish community is that, it's like the breakaway minions on Pico Robertson. A lot of people complain every time there's a breakaway minion. And I tell them, we've been breaking away minions for 2,000 years. This is what we do. You have an idea for a better shul, you get a little group and you move on and you do yours. Most of the shuls are started with breakaway minions. That never bothered me. I think I've tried very much in the Jewish Journal to have kind of different viewpoints. What I found was interesting, though, after October 7th, I've never seen kind of such unanimity. And, I have dear friends who are way to the left in Israel, friends of mine who write for Haaretz and really like peaceniks. And something about October 7th was different. And it seemed like for that, especially that first month, with such the horror. It's like nobody wanted to talk about, like, let's look at both sides. I think it's changing a little bit now, and a lot of Jews, and we've published stuff. We published a piece from Rabbi Artson on the value of Palestinian lives and so forth. So we try to go there. And also in terms of how we approach the Jewish connections and how we approach Jewish activity moving forward. One of the things that I've pushed back on is free speech. That, you know, we're so into this protection mode right now, and so many of us have kids on college campuses that are afraid. And it's really important that we make the distinction between harassment and intimidation and free speech. Jews do not want to become the killers of free speech. We live in a country where hate speech is protected speech. Even anti-Semitic speech is protected speech. That is a very inconvenient truth. It's painful for us to admit it, but it's also true. We have a cover story this week that comes out tomorrow on DEI and how should we approach diversity, equity, and inclusion. Should we look at it as an instrument to get more protection for Jewish students, or should we look at it as something that undermines liberal values? That is a debate. It's a fascinating debate. So I love those kind of debates. I love to push back. It's true that since October 7th, the horror of October 7th has kept so many Jews in the camp of, we must defend ourselves. It's true. And, you know, one of the things we try to do with the Jewish Journal is cover all those voices. And at the same time, you know, a lot of people are not storytellers, right? They're actually story creators. So right now you got thousands of Jews across the world that are creating stories. They're creating stories by coming up with some idea to ship stuff to Israel. So I think that it's the onus is on us, the three of us, to actually take these story creators and turn them into stories. And part of the story is going to be, like Ariel was saying, different viewpoints. And I love different viewpoints. But there is a certain thing about October 7th where I'll give you one good example. You brought up the new generation, Gary, like if not now, you know, and then on October 7th or October 8th, they released a statement on their website saying that pretty much, you know, Israel was responsible for the horror of October 7th. So basically they were using October 6th kind of arguments for something that was, you know, exponentially worse than anything we've seen since the Holocaust, right? So that was an opportunity for us to really push back and to say, well, how dare you? How dare you blame Israel for the atrocities of October 7th? So yeah, we've pushed back on many different ways, and we're going to keep pushing back.
I think it's amazing. I want to piggyback on that thing you just said. A question we got right at the beginning of this that I want to actually take the first pass at, and then I'm going to see if either of you want to. Kim Friedman asked, do you think it's possible to unindoctrinate the young population? Do you think we should invest the time, effort in this? So I think this is obviously absolutely yes. You know, the unfortunate reality is, you know, I think folks who have been engaged deeply in Jewish life, we forget that we're really a minority of the Jewish population. I read a statistic the other day. In 1920, the Jewish population in the United States was 3.5 million. And you think about today, we're at 5 million, 100 years later, and how many people have come here since then, and how many, so there's a huge volume of people who are sort of in between Jewish and not Jewish, or sort of in the cultural sphere. And, you know, and so many people who are disconnected. And they are, you know, and they often speak as Jews to the world about these issues, which is problematic. And their impression of Israel, their impression of this issue is they get their information through the same captured institutions, the media, which is pretty biased, social media, which is pretty biased. Their frame of reference is totally is no different than another American. And I think there's going to be a split within this group. Some people will go and play for the other team, as we've discussed. And I think there's been a lot of very disheartening things I've seen in that, you know, at this moment. All of us has a friend or relative or, you know, someone close to us who we've seen who's sort of picked up the mantle of even after October 7th. But then I think there's some percentage, I don't know what percentage it will be, but there'll be maybe 20% place for the other team. 30% that was disengaged is going to come back into Jewish life. be curious and, and feels. And I have seen anecdotally, just at this firm, I've gotten hundreds of emails and inquiries and people saying, I want to do something. I want to make a difference. I want to change careers. I want to advocate on this issue. I want to make a real change. And the question is, how do we equip those folks to make a difference? What's the story we tell them at this moment? How do we make them feel inspired? And it's not just about winning an argument. If it's just about winning an argument, we're going to lose, right? If we just say, we need you to be professional advocates, and that's all we have to offer you, we're going to lose. I think the value proposition that we need to communicate to young people is, this is a core piece of your identity at a moment when everyone is obsessed with their identity. This is a opportunity to get greater depth and spirituality and meaning in your life. And this is a connection to a whole group of people who love you and care about you and are like you and understand you at a moment of increasing polarization and loneliness. That's the core. And I've been in the business of advocacy and telling Israel's story for 20 years. I can tell you, if you don't have that basis, you're not going to bring enough people in to really make a difference. And so that's my question: is how do we bring people in and show them the beauty of what it means to be a Jew in this world, what it means to be connected to Israel, beyond, winning an argument on a social media chat or, or at a dinner party or something else like that. I don't know if Gary.
I want to jump in on this. Okay. Rather than talk about what the answer is, which I think, Nate, this is one of the answers. There are many answers out there. There are many people thinking who have had big backgrounds in education, museums, all these kinds of things that are going on. This is where we get back to the issue of coordination, collaboration, and creativity of the Jewish people. We need to be able to bring together people to start thinking right now in groups, to challenge one another, to put their ideas out there, and to then put our egos aside and say, how do we fuse together the information that we're hearing, the opinions that we're hearing, and then how do we create something? And I want to say create, not just put information out there. How do we create an idea out of this that then starts to engage people and starts to break the box and think differently? I know I sound like I'm pounding on the same drum over and over, but I think it's really, really essential that we collaborate, we pull people together. This is a time for the Jewish world to rethink our business and how we have done absolutely everything and put the problems in front of us that have been so accentuated since October 7th and start believing in one another and respecting each other, that we can work together to be able to evolve the new ideas that are needed.
Can I ask you to
part of that process, Nate, is we're going to have to confront reality. And the more we confront reality, the better the ideas will be. And one of that realities is that we're living at a time right now where it's not cool to be successful. It's not cool to be powerful. And it's not cool to be, to be Israel, because Israel is a strong, successful, powerful country. Jews are perceived in America to be strong and successful. Bret Stephens had a great line a few months ago. He said, the word success in America has changed. It used to be success. Now it's called white privilege. So we have to recognize the reality that these young Jews that are being indoctrinated and that are not, gathering towards the Israeli point of view and the Jewish point of view are going where they think the cool thing is right now. And the cool thing is to go with the underdogs, to go with the oppressed, to go with the non-whites. And this is part of the success of the other narrative, is that they look like the cool group. And I think one of the amazing opportunities we have as a Jewish community is to try to make being a winner cool again, is to try to make being a Zionist cool again. Because the truth is, to be pro-Palestinian today on a college campus is the safe choice.
Yep.
If you really want to be cool, then don't do the safe choice. Be a Zionist. Be on the side of the winners. So, and the truth is that Zionism can teach a lot, because Zionism is a story of a people that overcame incredible odds. And one of the ways that marginalized communities in America have been successful is by overcoming odds. So there is a thing that the Jews can teach to all the marginalized communities in America on how to grow and how to be successful. Whereas right now, the only aspiration is, how can I be a great victim? That is not the Jewish aspiration. So there is a very complicated situation here where we're up against a new thing in America where being successful is not the cool thing. And it would behoove us to try to bring back and resuscitate the idea of success as being something cool.
That's absolutely right. I think there's a tactical execution problem as well. I think you're 100% right that that's strategically just a core challenge we have to acknowledge. But the value proposition, now I know there's some Hillel directors on here, but if I'm thinking about who executes to young people and delivers a brand in a way that's attractive, exciting, connected to current trends, we're just not there. And we haven't been there for a long time. We still run our Jewish programming, not all of it, but a lot of it, like you're running a JCC in 1973. And we need a pipe dream I've had for many years. I helped years ago with a group called Zionists. We created this brand of
I remember how excited you were over that.
but the branding of it was beautiful. But I think that, something I've been talking about for many years, people have heard this, is we should have a Zion Music Festival for young people.
Hold on, wait. I told David Suissa years ago, we needed to create the Jewish Music Festival.
I think, well, maybe that'll be it. Maybe the Jewish Journal will be, but this is something I've been talking, because I think it's packaging. And one thing I've been very encouraged by, something I never thought I'd say, having lived in LA my whole life, folks in Hollywood are focused and furious on this issue. The same people who paid lip service to this or avoided Israel like the plague are now focused on how they can make a difference. And I think you're going to see a surge of creative people who know how to reach young people in a different way. Who are going
Comedians.
Comedians, artists, musicians. My sister is a professional musician, and she has this whole amazing community of other musicians who feel like she does on this issue and want it. So I think we need those creative folks to make this an attractive thing for young people in a different way. We need to brand it better. And I think we're going to get there. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. But when people are furious, when they're focused, they understand and they're creative, they're going to pour that energy. So I want to get to a question back to Gary. There's a few different iterations of this in the chat. People are really wanting to push you on this, Gary. They want practical advice. How do we do it? They say, it's great that you say we need to collaborate. Who's going to lead it? What is the architecture of it? How do we get the ability back? Different variations of that question. They're putting you on the dime. They want more.
I come to a new conclusion, folks. Let me tell you what it was, okay? So I got 500 emails from people, Jews all over the world, even the Jewish community of Iceland. I didn't know there was such a thing on this article, okay? What I began to realize, and also out of those emails, major communication professionals, all sorts of places, the only group I did not hear from is the leadership of major Jewish organizations. Not one of them came forward. And I began to realize the answer to this is the grassroots. This has never happened in the Jewish world. The grassroots has to be assembled in some way to push the leadership of the Jewish world in saying, the Amcha, the Jewish people, are demanding collaboration from you at this point. We have never pushed our will. It has always been top down rather than bottom up. So I've formed a group now of like 50 people. There's a WhatsApp group of all these communication professionals. We're talking about this. We're trying to figure all this stuff out at this point. It's overwhelming me. I think I'm crazy for having done this, but I really have come to the conclusion the only way this is going to happen is if you folks and if the Amcha of the Jewish people somehow organize and push our leadership and say, we are demanding collaboration from you.
So
that's it.
I think it's a beautiful answer. I want to give a little more color. As someone who has been speaking to many of the sort of powers that be, the institutional leadership in the community, I think in the same way that there's going to be an accounting for the intelligence failures that happened on October 7th in Israel, we are going to have an accounting here. And I think people, things that I have never seen in doing this for 20 years, I think there's an openness to the institutions for reform, for new ideas. And there's many places that didn't have a constituency before October 7th that either will, that they're going to either have to build a constituency or they're going to go out of business, because I think there's going to be a new era of accountability and focus. There will be money that's wasted, there will be energy that's wasted, but I do think that there's the surge of energy and interest is going to make these institutions better. I believe that. I really do.
You know, Nate, I love the fact that a lot of the listeners on this webinar are pushing us for something more practical, right?
Right.
I love that. I love that because it's so Jewish. So Jewish, and I get so much of that with the Jewish Journal. So I will share one very, very practical idea.
I love it.
You know, and it's ironic that it's the oldest idea in the book. It's ironic that I'm sitting exactly at the table of the idea. And it's ironic that it's Judaism's greatest gift to humanity. And it's so simple that I'm even embarrassed to bring it up. But as I was hearing Gary talk, I started dreaming if every Jewish organization in the world started tomorrow with an initiative that they would push the Friday night Shabbat table. Just imagine what would happen, right? It's extraordinary how one of the few things that I have zero disagreement on from anybody, whether it's non-Jews, Jews, no matter what denomination, there's nobody that's ever told me they didn't like the idea of gathering once a week for a couple of hours, disconnecting our iPhones, and we have this gift staring at us. And in terms of, you know, the storytelling of creating Jewish pride and injecting some positivity, because right now we're surrounded by negativity, and this negativity is a trap because it can drive us into more and more negativity, where we fight the haters, where we fight against anti-Semitism, and where we turn into victims. The Friday night Shabbat meal, no matter what we do the rest of the week, should be the one idea that unifies every Jewish group in the world, and they should try to promote it in their own way.
I want to piggyback on that. I totally agree with you. It's about the basic things, about if we can create a more connected, engaged Jewish community, everything else flows from there. And my corollary to that is we are in an information war, as Gary said. The other side has hired the most talented professionals in the world. As someone who does this for a living, I think we have underinvested in communications. We have expected volunteers, well-meaning volunteers who don't know how to fight an information war to fight it for us. We need to invest in professionals who understand what this is, you know, at a big global level. And then we have to focus on building a stronger, cohesive community. I want to end with one question that's sort of, it's been floating around here in the chat, and I will say we have so many different questions here. We might have to do this again, guys, just to get to all of the all the different backlog here, because I think this conversation could go on for many hours. You're a person out there in the world today, you know, a Jewish person. What is your call to action, Gary, David? We have many folks here who are just Jewish community members who want to know what they can do to make a difference in this, you know, in telling the Jewish story to ourselves and to the world. What's your one or two pieces of practical advice for them?
Gary, you want to go first?
No, you go first.
Okay, I'll go first. Look, the beautiful thing about stories is no matter which position you're in, if you're running an organization, a synagogue, if you're an individual, if you want to send something to the Jewish Journal, just start with a story. A story is going to get a lot more attention. You know, I speak to my mother every day, and if I didn't come up with stories, we wouldn't talk for half an hour. Most of our conversation is stories and memories of her life in Morocco, and stories just in your own personal life. It's so much more interesting to turn things into stories than to just stick with opinions and emotions. Those things come and go. Stories don't come and go. So my big urge to everyone who's listening here is anytime you're in front of someone, anytime you're at a Shabbat table, anytime you have to draft an email to your constituents, anytime you'd like to send something to the Jewish Journal, just try to focus on a story, an individual story, because that is what people remember the most.
Okay, two things. So I had breakfast Sunday morning in Tel Aviv with an extraordinary branding designer guy who has gotten deep into serious Kabbalah. And he says to me, Gary, he said, you will accomplish nothing if the Jewish spirit is not strengthened. And I thought about it for a second and I thought, okay, it may sound very woo, but he's absolutely correct. We have to strengthen the Jewish spirit. We have, as David said, our communal bonds, who we are, what our purpose is in the world, because that will lead us onto the next things that we do with a sense of meaning and purpose and strength. The other thing is about stories. I think we need to find the stories that have broken the boxes and have changed things. And we need to search out those stories. We need to create an anthology of them and put them out in front of the Jewish community so that we see breaking the boxes and we see possibility and we see success, because that's what we're going to have to do.
Okay, I'm gonna give one piece of practical advice, and then I think we'll wrap it up. I think we need a surge in pride. The talent and ability of the Jewish community is incredible. I've seen it over the last few months of people coming together and figuring out how to make a difference. We need to keep it going. We need to keep the energy of this moment going for months and years ahead and sustain and not just be focused. We all have our lives. We all have kids. We have family. We have careers. We have to make sure that this remains a priority for our community in the months ahead, so that it's not just the usual suspects who are engaging, but it's a broader group of people. We have to think about it in that sense, and I think that is very important. I want to thank my dear friends and collaborators, Gary Wexler, David Suissa. This was a fantastic conversation. For those of you listening, we're going to be making it available. We're going to share this recording with this group, with everybody who registered. You can feel free to share it as a resource. I think we might have to do this again, guys. I think there's enough questions that weren't answered, enough interest, so we may stay tuned. We'll let you know about future webinars, and we really appreciate everybody joining us today.
I want to say one thing, folks. When we talk about Jewish communal bonds, David, Nathan, I love you. I think we all love each other.
We do.
This love between us and this sense of purpose between us is the model, I think, for the Jewish world. So I feel very fortunate.
And above all, Gary, there are lots of stories between us.
That's true too.
Stories. Don't even ask me of them, folks.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.